Justin Fields is going to absolutely break fantasy football in 2023. In reality, Justin Fields broke out in 2022, but he is going to single-handedly win you several weeks in 2023, and the reason why may surprise you. So let's go through Justin Fields in 2022 first up. So he finishes the quarterback 6 in 2022. Now on a points per game basis, he actually finishes the quarterback 5 as he had 20.5 fantasy points per game. So as we know, he had so many big boom games in 2022 that he had just such a high floor just because he would have such massive games, and these massive spike games were raising his floor. Obviously, like I said, the most of that success came from his running. So let's break down what he did on the ground in 2022 and what made his year so special and why we can bank on it for the next coming year. So in 2022, he had 10.7 rushes per game, 76.2 yards per game, and 0.5 touchdowns per game. Now what that added up to for the whole season, when you look at it from a season-long perspective, he had 160 rushes, 1,143 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, 67 was his longest rush, and that was all done in 15 games. So what we can take away from that is obviously Justin Fields, like I said, fantastic runner. And when you look at the longest rush right there, 67, that doesn't even tell the full story. He had several games where he rushed 60-yard runs, 50-yard runs, 40-yard runs. He had several games where he broke off just massive runs that ended up being touchdowns or really close to it. So Justin Fields, that doesn't even tell the full story because he had multiple big rushes, man. And what he also did was he became one of 3 quarterbacks in NFL history to log for a 1,000-yard rushing season. And those other 2 guys that did it were Michael Vick and Lamar Jackson. So he is in rarefied air with those other top rushing quarterbacks in NFL history. Forget current day NFL players. NFL history, he is in the top 3. Now, the point that we need to understand here is that with those rushing numbers, why did he not have a higher average fantasy points per game? That should have been a lot higher when you look at his rushing numbers, right? If he is an even decent thrower of the football, those numbers should be around 22, 23, 24 as his fantasy points per game average. So let's take a closer look at what he did throwing the ball in 2022. In 2022, this is what he did season long. He had 2,242 passing yards, a 17-11 touchdown interception ratio, a total of 318 pass attempts, and he had a 60.4% completion percentage. Those aren't very good numbers, guys. In fact, those are super low. We're talking like 1980s, 1990s passing numbers for Justin Fields here. Now, what that broke down to on a per game basis was 21.2 attempts per game at 149.5 yards per game. So we can see why Justin Fields' floor of fantasy points per game scored on average wasn't as high as it should have been. His passing was honestly abysmal. A 60% completion percentage rating, that's in the neighborhood of guys like Baker Mayfield, what Russell Wilson did last year, what Derek Carr did last year, what Carson Wentz is. It's not a good completion percentage. And if you notice all the guys that I mentioned, they are a combination of out of the league right now, on a brand new team, or locked into an unbelievably ridiculous contract that nobody can get out of. But this leads us into why there are such high hopes for Justin Fields in 2023. So what we need to realize first and foremost is that Justin Fields, we need to break it down to 2 halves of a season, because Justin Fields' 2022 season, it really was a tale of 2 halves. So the first half of the season for Justin Fields, it was really bad for him. Justin Fields spent most of his time inside the pocket, not really moving around as much and trying to become a pocket passer first and foremost. That was a bad recipe for Justin Fields in 2022. In his first 6 games, he had 115 pass attempts, 63 completions, and that led him to a 54.8% completion percentage. That is awful. Absolutely awful. Zach Wilson type numbers, guys. Now, obviously, when you look at the Bears' season-long finish and what their record showed, you wouldn't think that there was much improvement from Justin Fields in the back half of the season. Well, that's the thing. That's why we need to break this stuff down. In his last 9 games, everything changed. He had 203 pass attempts, 129 completions for 63.5% completion percentage. That is almost a 10% increase in completions over the last 9 games of the season. That was a huge change that was made there. So what was the change? Well, the change was that there was a report that came out that a Bears coach, either the offensive coordinator or Matt Eberflus, they were studying the Ravens and Eagles offenses about mid-season to find out how they could best utilize their running quarterback, Justin Fields. I couldn't find the report anywhere. If you could find it, please let me know if you remember it at the very least in the comments below. So obviously, they ended the season on a much better note when it comes to Justin Fields. And during the offseason, the moves that they have made have been very, very interesting and very, very important in the important places. They have improved their offensive line. They went out and drafted Jarnell Wright in the first round of the 2023 NFL Draft. But they also realized before that Justin Fields couldn't catch the ball himself. With Darnell Mooney down last year for the back half of the season, Justin Fields had nobody to throw to. Cole Kmet became a good option, and he is a good tight end option, but he is not a number 1 wide receiver. That is when they get DJ Moore. DJ Moore is the best wide receiver Justin Fields has ever played with so far. This is a massive addition, and it is very, very similar to what the Philadelphia Eagles did when they added A.J. Brown for Jalen Hurts to unlock his breakout season in 2022. But there is a difference here between what Jalen Hurts did in 2022 and even what Lamar Jackson did in his breakout season versus what Justin Fields did in 2022. And this is the reason that Justin Fields is going to break fantasy football this year. So most of us have been playing fantasy football long enough to remember what Lamar Jackson did in 2019. It was outrageously good. He was so fun to watch on the NFL level and just from a fantasy football level. When you check that score and see what he did, it was unbelievable. In 2019, he averaged 28.1 fantasy points per game that year. What's interesting, though, is when you look at his game log on the screen right now, he did not log a single 40-point game. That's interesting, right? In fact, he didn't even log a 40-point game until 2021. His best score in 2019 was Week 15 against the New York Jets when he logged 37.1 fantasy points. So remember that. Now we're going to look at Jalen Hurts. Also, when you look at Jalen Hurts' game log on the screen right now in 2022, he did not log a single 40-point game either. And it was his breakout season. His best game was in Week 15 against Chicago when he had 36.7 fantasy points. Justin Fields logged 2 40-point performances in Week 9 and 10 of 2022. Now, obviously, there are several factors that lead into a fantasy quarterback and how they score their fantasy points. Things like offensive line, wide receiver help, how well they rush at, right? There's several different factors, and to be clear, Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts' best games in their breakout seasons were excellent as well. They just weren't 40-plus point games. 40-plus points, that's fantasy breaking numbers right there that Justin Fields did in 2022 with no wide receivers. And what they all had in common is they're all great, exceptional running quarterbacks. But Justin Fields was the one who did it, and he had no wide receivers to throw to. So when you combine the improvements that Chicago has made to their offensive line and their wide receiver core with Justin Fields' much improved play in the back half of 2022, we are looking at somebody who will not only win you leagues this year, but will break fantasy football in 2023. And if you want to know who will break your team in 2023, click on this video right here.